Once I'd come to an understanding that my daughter was neurodivergent, that she was autistic with a PDA profile, that she was ADHD and all the other things that come along with that, one of the biggest challenges I faced was actually speaking to educators, the teachers, the SENDcos, the heads, who didn't really understand what my daughter was going through. Opening up the lines of communication was such a challenge when you lean into parent blame and all those things that we associate with what happens when we have to discuss the issues our kids are facing with the schools. In that vein, the SEND network reached out to me. They wanted me to sort of reflect on my experience as a parent, as a carer, and what it's like really discussing this stuff. What do teachers, what do SENDcos and educators in general need to look out for and need to understand when it comes to really understanding our kids? This is the interview they did with me. So this is basically me being interviewed. The tables have been turned and I'm on the other side of the desk this time. And yeah, they're interviewing me about the challenges I face. So please sit back, enjoy.
Hello, welcome to this episode of the SEND Network podcast. Today I'm joined by the brilliant Duncan Caspern.
Hello.
Hello. Duncan, also known as PDA Dad UK, is a YouTuber and SEND advocate with almost 10,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. He's creating a space to help people understand autism, pathological demand avoidance, and the broader spectrum of neurodiversity. So thank you for joining me.
You're more than welcome. I'm glad to be here. It's an honour.
Today's episode is about unmasking neurodivergence. Many neurodivergent people mask as a way to disguise parts of themselves to better fit in with those around them. Today we're going to talk about the effects of masking, how to encourage neurodivergent students to unmask, and as well, because we have PDA Dad UK himself, we're going to discuss pathological demand avoidance too. So we're going to start off with masking. We'll do the basics of what is and what can it look like.
Masking is something that many autistic people, I think that many neurodivergent people do, but it's more commonly associated with autism. The reason it's so damaging is that for a lot of autistic people, there's this awareness that they're different from the majority of people around them. And it's often at a subconscious level. So simply by having that subconscious understanding or even a conscious understanding, there's a process that takes place where you repress your authentic self, if you like. So for an autistic person, they think, this isn't even a conscious decision necessarily, but it's like, I can't reveal that I'm different here because that's going to cause me problems or people are going to judge me. Happens a lot more in females than it does in males, but males do it as well. And especially PDA, it's really common. What it is, it's like things like, so stimming is something that we know is a really healthy activity for neurodivergent people. So for those who don't understand, stimming is the process where you will physically manage your anxiety or your discomforts or whatever by performing physical tasks or physical activity. So there can be really subtle forms of stimming. I do it all the time. My leg jiggles.
Yep.
My wife hates it, but I get called off a dozen times a day. You're shaking the sofa, stop jiggling. For my daughter, she'll curl her hair. She's found quite a subtle one. For a lot of autistic people, it could be really quite obvious. So you'll often see examples of people shaking their hands, nodding their heads. And it can sometimes be something that can be dangerous in that if someone's stimming in a way that could cause harm to themselves or other people, then that's important to obviously prevent. But rather than stopping them stimming is looking for a way to stim that is not going to harm themselves or anybody else, so it's safer. My son has needed a sensory toy at school. My son's recently been diagnosed as ADHD, and what his school have done is allowed him to take putty in. So he can just sit and play with putty, and if he wants to be more subtle, he can just pick up some blue tack, and it's not obvious. So it's, he's just playing. So that's stimming. It's a physical way of managing the anxiety that's within. What a person who's masking would do is go, I can't show that I'm different in any way, shape or form to everybody else here, so I'm not going to do that. And they repress it. And it gets called the Coke bottle effect. And what that means is that, and I have to be very careful here with the visuals because I always get in trouble. They call it the Coke bottle effect because basically it's a bottle being shaken all day. I can't do it with my hands in any way that doesn't look very suspicious. But it's been shaken up all day. Every time there's an anxiety and they want to stim or they want to express it somehow or say something, they repress it. It goes down. It's like, no, I can't do that. And so that's a shake of the bottle. And once you get to the end of the day, when they get to a place they feel safe, home, with parents, with their safe person, they let it all out. It's like the lid coming off the bottle and it explodes everywhere. And you get these monumental meltdowns and behaviors that challenge and all that kind of stuff. Or it could just be that they have a shutdown, whatever it is that is their form of processing that. Once that lid's off, once the mask falls, it all comes out. And it's, a day, a week, a month's worth of repression all at once. More than that, in the long term, it can lead to some really severe mental health issues down the track, because when you're repressing that anxiety and it's not going anywhere, it's causing a longer term cognitive damage, I suppose, is the best way to put it, that causes these issues down the track. So, my wife is bipolar. She's also autistic, not diagnosed, but self-diagnosed. We know it from knowing our daughter is autistic. And, we see the similarities and the shared traits, if you like. But that whole thing of her lifetime of masking and, sort of pretending to be someone she not being her authentic self. And that's so important for everybody. Everyone says you've got to be yourself and who you really are. But when it comes to appearing too different, people judge. And if you're getting get glares because you're shaking your hands, then people are going to stop doing that. And it's really damaging. So masking is what I believe to be probably the single biggest barrier to diagnosis. The reason for that is you've got schools who are looking and going, well, they're little angels here. They come in, they say hi. I say hi to them, they say hi back. They go and sit down, they sit, and they're just like angels all day. They could be the perfect student. If if there's a problem and you're having the stuff at home, it's parenting or it's this, and you get this parent blame thing that happens. What's actually happening is the total opposite. The reason they're letting it all out at home is because they know that's their safe place to be their authentic self. And in school or at work or wherever it is that they're not in their safe place, they're repressing all this stuff. So masking is something really important to it, especially for education professionals. Being able to identify masking is so key.
Yeah. Do children, I guess adults maybe might be a bit more aware of it, but do children know that they're masking when they're doing it, or is it sort of a subconscious thing?
It's it almost universally starts as a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
There comes a point where it can become deliberate. So I've spoken to a large number of autistic people who are just amazing people, but they'll tell me, yeah, it's something that I can flick it on like a switch now as well. So if I know I'm going somewhere, I almost consciously make a decision. It takes place subconsciously still too. And it's sort of like, when you're driving a car and you get home and you realize, I don't even really know how I got here. I was sort of just it's sort of like that. It's just something that automatically kicks in, and it's the same sort of thing. So for most kids, it's predominantly is something it's taking place at a subconscious level. But there does come a point where a lot of people seem to be able to identify, I need to mask now, and so it can become a conscious decision as well.
And as we're talking to SENDcos educators, what would you recommend? Like, what could they look out for in a child to see, in school if they are masking?
That's such a good question, and it's so important. If you've got the kid that appears to be the model student and the parent is saying we're having real difficulties at home,
yeah,
rather than leaping to the conclusion there's a problem at home, take a step back and think, now I know about masking now.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm seeing at school? And start looking for almost like micro expressions and stuff like that might just give things away and make you realize. Have just stand at the window at the end of school, or when you taking the kids out, depending on how your school works. When they get to their parents, does their behavior change immediately? Do they suddenly start letting go? Won't always see that, because a lot of kids will wait till they're home.
Yeah.
And once they're home, they can be their authentic selves and let it go. So you might not see it, but you might even pick up on just like a feeling of relief that it's over. And kids will get that at school anyway. You know, kids in school isn't always, they don't always want to be there. But there are things that you can start looking for in school itself. There's a term called echolalia, and echolalia is, it can be a form of stimming. If you hear kids that will hum or might repeat phrases over and over, that's echolalia, and it can be quite soothing. So it might be certain sounds actually create a pleasant sensation sensory wise. Part of echolalia is they may have watched a TV show and they picked up a phrase, and in their heads it's like, when I get asked this is the answer. They don't necessarily understand the meaning of the answer, but to put it as simply as possible, you say, "Good morning, Stephen," and Stephen says back to you, "Good morning, sir," or "Good morning, ma'am," goes and sits down. They may not understand what they're really saying, that you're wishing someone to have a good morning. It's just simply, I know that's the phrase I need to use in order to get to the next point, which is sitting down, and it becomes a rehearsed thing. Look for things like, is it the same tone every time? Is it exactly the same phrase? You know, when I greet people, or maybe I get, "Hey," because I'm Australian, that can come out. It might be, "How you doing? Morning. What's up? How's things today?" There's a variety. They're all saying essentially the same thing, but there's a variety in the tone, because it's just natural, you know, especially if there's a large group of people. It's almost like, you know, meeting the king, isn't it? Like, yeah, "Greetings, your Majesty." Everyone has the same thing to say. And it's very, if it looks like that could be a sign that there's echolalia taking place. They're not actually understanding what they're saying. They might learn to understand it with time, but look for things like the tone. Is the tone always the same? Then when they're actually seated, or when they're actually in class time, have a look for little behaviors. Are they stimming subtly? So it might be that they're holding their hands under the desk and they're just tapping or something like that on their legs. They might be shaking a leg. They might just be playing with a pencil, but have a look. Is there anxiety that's being reflected? When you start taking notes of these things, and you can build up a picture of, actually, I'm seeing when this person comes in, they're very rehearsed, and I'm concerned, not concerned is the wrong word. I can see that there's a rigidity to this that would indicate that they're masking. You can say, "I'm seeing signs of anxiety at school." Make little notes, just picking up why are they feeling anxious at that point? Is there now a task that they're feeling uncomfortable with? Has the noise level increased? Is there something coming up that's either, and it can be good stuff. I love PE, so I'm going to go out and play PE, and I'm getting excited about that. It all fills that emotional cup inside that's only got as much capacity as it has. So by noting these things, you can be such a support to not only that child, but the greater family surrounding, the people who are supporting that child. Because once this is identified, it's like, so is there a neurodiversity that's in the picture here? And can we then support that? And by support that, I mean, how can we make our environment feel safer for this individual to be able to be their authentic self? They'll have a more rewarding experience at school. They'll probably learn more. They'll be happier within themselves, and you're going to prevent, you know, potentially serious mental health issues down the track by doing so.
Wow, really interesting. And it sounds like really sometimes it can be hiding in plain sight, you know.
Absolutely. In fact, that's exactly what it is. It's a camouflage.
Yeah,
It's, how do I not be noticed in this? That is
yeah.
exactly what it is. Yeah.
Now, a group of people that do mask quite a fair bit are what you like to call PDAers, which I
Yeah.
quite. Now, PDA is pathological demand avoidance, for anyone listening that doesn't know or hasn't heard of it before. We'll start with what PDA is. So tell me about pathological demand avoidance and like what it looks like. Again, a bit like what we said with masking.
So pathological demand avoidance is a profile within the autism spectrum. Very technical, professional way of saying it. Basically, most neurodiversity, certainly almost all profiles within autism, and many other neurodivergent profiles that exist, is based on an elevated level of anxiety inside. Things like stimming, which we talked about, are a way of exercising that anxiety in a way that is physical and lets it free. meltdowns, shutdowns, certain sounds, things like that. And we all do it. There's actually an interesting thing is that we all stim, and people don't realize it. But if you're going retail therapy, that's a form of stimming because you're stressed. I need to go and buy myself something that makes me feel better. If you're going to the gym to let out some energy, that's a form of stimming. For me, picking up my guitar, I can lose myself. That's a form of stimming. We all stim one way or another. It's just that we've learnt very discrete ways of stimming that don't make it obvious that we're struggling or we have an anxiety or a stress in our life. For a lot of autistic people, I talk about the internal cup of emotion. We have this internal cup that fills and empties during the day, so we might be excited about something that's going to fill that cup up with some excitement. It might be that we're worried about something coming up. Maybe there's a doctor's appointment or something, and it's going to fill it with a bit of anxiety or stress or concern. These things all build up, and then, we experience it. It's all good and it all goes away. The closer we get to the top of that internal cup, the closer we are to it all spilling over. For my daughter, that cup's almost always close to full. So for a lot of autistic people, for a lot of neurodivergent people, that the reason is that cup is always nearly full. So it feels like they're suddenly going in a meltdown. Where'd that come from? Actually, they've been really close for a long time. It's just that they're just about managing it, and then that small thing is hit and it's all spilled over the edge. For my daughter, her way of managing that high level of anxiety that's inside is to be in control. So the central facet of PDA, pathological demand avoidance, is this element of I need to be in control of my environment. So to bubble that down to a very basic example, if I say to my daughter, go and tidy your room, it's a state. No, I'm not going to do it, would be the instant answer. I've created a demand that's actually in itself created an extra anxiety. Her brain subconsciously goes, to be in control, I'm not going to do this because I'm going to tell you I'm not going to do it. That puts me in control. By learning strategies around that. So rather than go tidy your room, go up there with her and, oh, what's this on? Where should we put this? Where would you like this? Giving her a sense of control within her environment, but still managing to get on with, the things that are important in life that we all have to do. Cleaning ourselves, self-maintenance, self-care, making a meal, making a drink, all those kind of things. They all demands. For a lot of kids, especially when you've got school itself, if you're seeing kids that are really wound up when they get to school or are masking really heavily when they get to school, they just had a morning where they've had to be out of bed at a certain time, they've had to get dressed, they've had to do their teeth, they've had to wash or have a shower or a quick bath, they've had to go down, they've had to have their breakfast, they've had to get in their uniform, they've had to get into the car, they've had to get to school, they've had to get out of school, they've had to go into class. It's demand on demand on demand on demand on demand. And so instantly you've got a really, really anxious person. That's the central facet of PDR, in my opinion, is that need for control. And that just leads to this element of demand avoidance. So you present a demand and I'm not going to do it. Or you tell them not to do something, well, I'm not going to do it now, because it comes back to that need for control. It's a lot more complex than that. And there's a lot more to it. But that's sort of a very basic understanding of what PDA is.
Yeah. And I think from that, it's really important to say, it is about control, because I'm sure people will be listening and thinking, all children don't want to tidy their rooms. I'm thinking about when I was younger. And
Exactly.
I'm not doing it.
That's a key point you've made there. That's there's people don't like the word pathological, and I kind of understand that. But that is probably the reality of it. You've got there's autistic demand avoidance, and there's just demand avoidance that we all experience. Procrastination is demand avoidance in whatever form. If you've got a task you've got to do, you don't want to do it. I'll do this first. Anything to avoid it. That's demand avoidance. I once did a tweet that was, under no circumstances must you like or retweet this tweet. And it was my most liked and retweeted tweet. I sort of made the point, you just experienced demand avoidance. That's exactly what it is. For someone like my daughter, it does take on that pathological aspect. Demand avoidance is something that we can, demand avoidance in everyday life is something that we can manage, and we have to, I know I've got to go and do that eventually, so I might as well get it done. And for someone it takes on that pathological status, it's not a nice word, but people have come in with things like pervasive and stuff like that, nicer ways to describe it. Basically, if you bubble it down, it is something that takes place on a level that can't be controlled, or at a conscious state. It's taking place subconsciously, and it's something that can't be alleviated. So it's not something that just is, I just have to work through this. So that's where that pathological element comes in, and it's a very medical term. There are nicer ways to phrase it, but the reality is, if you look at it that way, with our understanding of what pathological means, it does take on that thing. It's something that is constantly there and always present, and in all situations. For some people, they get autistic demand avoidance, and that may be that it comes in every now and again when things are particularly stressful. Then that demand avoidance comes in, that need to sort of control your environment, but it goes away again. It's not constant.
We'll link it back to sort of masking now. So, we've mentioned that people with PDA are often, it's very common for them to mask. So why is this, and how can that affect their school time as well?
Going back to what we said about masking, that repression is what's taking place when you've got somebody who is masking something at the level of PDA. It's extreme. There's an extreme amount of anxiety that's being repressed. The problem that presents, or the challenge that is there for a lot of parent carers, is that if they're masking this at school, because they don't want to stand out, oh, he's the kid that trashed the classroom or smashed the smart board or threw a desk. So they'll hide it, they'll repress it. But that means that when they get home, we experienced this in a massive way. It made home life almost unbearable in some ways. Not my daughter's fault. Don't blame her at all. And we've got to a place now where we understand this stuff and we work to support it. But because it's her safe place, she'd be unsafe at school. She'd get home and it would be just monumental every time. And it was meltdowns, things getting smashed. The difficulty was that she didn't understand it. She was, 5, 6, 7. This wasn't something that she could, as an adult, I can sit and process things and take an element of, oh, well, I can see I was upset about this, and therefore I need to work with that. For her, she was, it's a kid, and kids will have a tantrum because they haven't got the sweet they want, let alone having to repress all that all day. The thing that helped us in the end was that for my daughter, she couldn't mask in the end. It was like she masked, and this still happens now. When she's in a new environment, she'll mask for a period, but she can't contain it. There's just a point where there's too much pressure building up, and she was being excluded from school because she was becoming violent in the classroom and stuff like that. That ironically helped us in that it really identified that there was something that, this mainstream school wasn't working for her for that reason, and she needed an alternative provision. So that masking for PDAs is really challenging. I use a great analogy I was given by a doctor, and my daughter had banged her toe at a soft play, and I took her in because it had gone black, and I was like, if this is broken, we need to get it fixed. Whatever, it wasn't, which is good. But she wouldn't let him touch her. And he said, is she autistic? And it was the usual sort of, not diagnosed yet. We're on the pathway. We've been on it for this many years. And yes, we're waiting. And he's like, I can see it. And he actually said to me, watch what I do as I talk to her now. And he explained to me, basically, there's 3 parts of the brain. And he used Star Trek as the analogy. And you only need a very basic understanding of Star Trek. Everyone will get this. Essentially, you've got 3 parts of the brain. The front of your brain is Spock, pure logic. That's our rational, problem-solving part of the brain. In the middle, towards the back, you've got your emotional side, Captain Kirk. Pure emotion, that's where you feel your feels and your, everything that goes on there. Happy, sad, angry, frustrated, positive, whatever. It's there. At the base of our brain, we've got what's called the amygdala, which is, they actually say, is our lizard senses. So if you remember, there's a lizard man in Star Trek, and they call it the lizard. But that's basically our fight, flight, freeze. It's our danger awareness. So it can be influenced by trauma. It can be influenced by just experience. Normally, when your brain's working in a healthy way, all 3 are communicating. Spock, Kirk, the lizard. Danger awareness, I'm not familiar with this environment. Emotional reaction, I'm a little scared right now, or I'm concerned. Logic comes in. This isn't the same situation. We can just keep our eyes open and, make sure, if you've had an accident in a car and you're more wary turning around a certain type of corner, that's that thing. But your logic, I'm going to do it carefully. And Spock's giving his input to Kirk and back to the lizard, and they're all communicating really well. That's what I call the green light traffic light system. That's your green. That's when all things are working really healthily. You're not particularly stressed and life is pretty cool. We might get into a stressful situation. So going back to sort of, being in traffic or something, and you've got the guy in front or behind you who's riding your butt and you just want to slam the brakes and annoy them or whatever else. But logic's got, no, that's dangerous. Spock's going, no, 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 just maybe pull over you out to the other lane and let them pass or whatever else. And you're stressed. You're in the amber of the traffic light now. But Spock's still in the picture. He's still speaking and he's still communicating with Kirk and the lizard. Whilst it appears that my daughter has those green light moments, she doesn't. She lives in the orange. She's always at that highly anxious state, which means it only takes something very small, that cup filling up that little bit too much, before she clicks into the red zone. And when we're in the red zone, when we're in the red light, Spock decides, I'm going to go for a little walk now. And all you're left with is your emotional processing and your fight, flight, or freeze. So you get meltdowns, shutdowns, panic, whatever it is. Like a meltdown is basically just a massive panic attack. Same with a shutdown. It's just the way the brain, the individual processes and wants to deal with it. So for my daughter, being a PDA, having that high anxiety, having, at school, she was in that orange all the time. And there's only so long you can keep it in the orange before it has to go to red. And once she felt, once she'd gone into the red, it became something that she felt more and more comfortable doing, just because that was her emotional state. Being able to take that step back when you're looking at these kids and go, okay, this isn't home. There's something that's really troubling this kid, and I'm starting to see it. When you're looking for that masking, when you're looking for those triggers, there are so many ways that you can adjust the environment a little bit to make life so much easier for those people and have a much safer experience at school. So be it PDA, be it traditional autism, be it any other kind of neurodivergent profile, to be able to make the world manageable for them is just so much easier. We keep trying to shape people to fit a world. Jimmy Carr was on the radio a short while ago, made an amazing statement, which I really appreciated.
School teaches us a lesson about mediocrity and being all-rounders, and yet we live in a world that does not reward all-rounders. Who gives a fuck about all-rounders? If you get a D in physics and you get an A in English, I say just go to English lessons, because we're going to get you up to a C grade in physics. I'll tell you what the world doesn't need: someone who's shit at physics. Still shit at physics.
And it was like, that's so true. And for neurodivergent people, that's often the case. You look at who's in charge, who's running these big companies these days. Elon Musk is autistic. I don't like him particularly, but he's autistic. Bill Gates, autistic. If you look at some of his videos, you can see him stimming in some stressful situations. Steve Jobs, very likely autistic. Tesla, the scientist, not the car, he was autistic, posthumous diagnosis. Same with Einstein. All these amazing discoveries that are made in this world is because you've got somebody who's just really focused on something, but also has the ability to see it from a different perspective to the neurotypical brain. And it provides solutions that we wouldn't have otherwise found. Let's start honing these skills of these people and seeing the value, because that's going to make them feel valued. That's going to actually prop them up, and it's actually going to help the world in the long run. So there's no lose in this situation.
I think that all just sums up as well why masking isn't something that should be encouraged. I think sometimes you sort of can think, oh, what's sort of the harm in that? But actually, letting people be their true selves you can bring out the talents. And someone like Einstein celebrated years after he's passed away,
and was told by teachers he'd never amount to anything, because but that's the thing as well, is that put yourself in a situation, everybody can identify with this. Have you ever been to a party and you just don't want to be there? Those things, it's a work do or something like that, and you've got to mingle with people you don't particularly want to mingle with, put on the smile and probably drink more than you'd want to with those people, and it's just and you get home and you're just mentally drained because you haven't done anything particularly stressful, but just the pressure of being in that situation is exhausting. That's what we're subjecting these kids to every day that they're masking, because that is masking. You are putting on your happy face for a situation you don't particularly want to be in. That's exactly what masking is. So we all mask to one degree or another. We know to manage it, and we know, oh, that was exhausting, I'm going to rest now. When you're dealing, especially with kids, that process, that tiredness and exhaustion, but it's not combined with a physically tired body necessarily. It's a mental exhaustion. And so you get this off balance scale of tiredness and energy. And it's just, yeah, it can be so destructive.
Now we're going to get into the good bit, I think, the how to get into avoiding masking. I've sort of split this into 3 bits. So the first bit is about working with the student and building trust. As an educator, you know, maybe you've recognized that a child's masking in your class.
Yeah.
How can you help them unmask?
Masking all takes place because of a feeling of being unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a place I can authentically be myself. I'm not safe to do so here. Therefore, I am going to mask until I'm in an environment I feel safe. It's all about how do we make an environment feel safer for an individual. So if you picked up on there's stimming and you're noticing it's at certain times, I know a major thing for a lot of neurodivergent people is things like assemblies for kids, because you're all suddenly going into a different environment. You're going from your classroom, you're going through the halls, everyone's got to queue up, move in there gently. There's lots of noise, lots of chaos in the situation. Then suddenly you're in there with half the school or the whole school. It can be really challenging. And all that time is going to be, I'm going to mask, I'm going to mask, I'm going to mask. And that's going to be really damaging. If you know that a kid's struggling with that, maybe it's good to say, you know what, is an assembly really that important? Is there any information I can just give this child afterwards? If it's important, they'll know from that. That's fine. So maybe just being in an environment, well, okay, we're going to leave you with the, you know, there's a TA here, or maybe even just if there's a few kids in the school, which almost certainly there would be who struggle with it, we're going to have somebody in the library, it's quiet space, they can read a book, they can chill out. That's one big stress out of a day. That can make a huge difference. The other thing that I think is really good is learning subtle ways of communicating, allowing the young person to communicate what they're experiencing. There are so many ways I've seen this done. Some people have bracelets where one side's red, one side's green.
Yeah, I've seen them. It's
just a way of, I'm feeling stressed, I'm going to click. It can be done really subtly, so nobody else in the class has to know. Change my bracelet over to the red side. I can sit like this, and the teacher will see and know. Maybe it's, oh, can you, you know, do you need a toilet break or something like that? Allow them to leave the class and maybe re-regulate. You can shape in things like sensory breaks, being able to say that, okay, maybe 10 minutes after playtime or lunch break, you can have a 10-minute thing in a quiet room or a sensory area in the school that you can just chill out and, you know, get back in. Maybe it's arranging for the child to, you can come into school 10 minutes late and you'll leave 10 minutes early, because that way you avoid the big crowds and it's a lot calmer and a much easier transition. All these are they're little changes that aren't going to make a massive impact on anything, but actually in the long run are going to have a huge impact on the individual in being able to feel safe. Marie Gentles, who I think you guys have interviewed here, certainly she was at the SEND show. I've interviewed her myself. She did this show on BBC, which was Don't Exclude Me. And I watched that initially and was quite annoyed by it, because there were these obviously neurodivergent kids who were, why isn't neurodiversity being addressed in this? I managed to reach out to Marie, and I interviewed her with an autistic lady, because we were kind of like, well, this is going to be interesting, isn't it? And Marie answered the question so well and said, no, I was actually upset. I should have said something in it, but I didn't do the editing kind of thing. And it was, so I agree, there needed to be more attention paid. And I came out, we both came out of it with a totally new respect for Marie Gentles, because it was just like, that's fantastic. But you see, things that she did in that show, if you haven't watched it, go and watch it. Keep the lens of understanding neurodiversity in there, rather than just a, you know, troubled child causing problems for everybody else. One of the things that she did was she had like a 10-minute thing at the end of the day where he could just spend 10 minutes with the teacher alone. In having that relationship reinforced, he felt more and more comfortable in that environment, because he had a trust that was building up with that teacher, and she was becoming a safe person to him. There was an understanding that was going both ways. Those little things can just make such a difference. Now, I'm not stupid, and I realize that if you've got 5 neurodivergent people in your class, that's suddenly 50 minutes that that isn't necessarily practical. So maybe look for the cases where it just really is needed. You can see that person needs to feel that trust, or maybe spread it out over the week. In doing so, letting them know, I'm always here and you can come and talk to me quietly when there's a moment, or you can use your band or use a card on your desk that you can flip over, or something that just communicates to me that, you're feeling anxiety. I will always be here for you. You build up yourself as being a safe person in that child's life. It is only going to make that child's life that much better.
Yeah, that was perfect. I like as well, it reminds me of a saying that you've had before about how can I make my daughter's tomorrow better than today?
And it is mantra I now live by. Yeah.
It's all those little things that really can help a child at school to feel safer and be themselves.
We're talking to educators here. Majority of people that are going to be tuning into this are going to be educators. And I really feel for you guys. And something that I've experienced is that I think that there's so much conflict. And I think for a lot of teachers, it's kind of scary, because once you start addressing this stuff, you've got an angry parent who's like, oh, there are three types of people in this world. You've got your fighters, your flighters, and your freezers. The flighters have flown, the freezers have frozen, and all you're left with is the fighters. So being able to take a step back and go, I'm with you on this, and I want to support you guys. You can diffuse that situation so much more easily. You're in a really difficult position, and it's not easily understood. And a lot of the problems that are made by what I think is, greater government filtering down, and the costs that are associated that suddenly have to be footed by the schools, I get it. And you guys are put in a remarkably difficult position, because you've got rules and regulations you have to abide by, and you've got a vulnerable person at the other end of it and everybody else in between, and you kind of got to navigate that. The reality is, I think you don't have to spend a fortune in order to make a neurodivergent child's experience of education that much better. It's these little touches that you can do. And I think that I don't know many people in teaching, and I know a lot of teachers. I don't know anybody in my experience who's in teaching because they hate kids.
Yeah.
It's the total opposite. And it's just so hard to sometimes get that across. So I want to say that, all that we've said before, I'm saying it with an air of empathy for you, because I think it is something that is just so challenging to get across, and you don't know what to share and what not to share, what complexities there are that you can explain. I say, take an open book approach. I'm being really honest with you here. Here's my restrictions. I don't like it, but I'm stuck with it. Just that honesty and directness with whoever you're dealing with. And if you can see these things taking place and you're not hearing from a parent, it could be that they're a flighter or a freezer and they're just not coping. So it can be a good way to reach out in a gentle way. Say, if you need anything, we're here. You can make people's lives so much better with those small gestures, small changes. It seems like another one is your classroom really bright? Most classrooms are. I get it, because that's what most people need, or enjoy it. It's stimulating, it's vibrant, it's fun. For a person who's autistic and has sensory processing disorder, that could be torture. Have some ear defenders on things. Allow them to bring in earbuds that are noise cancelling, a lot more subtle than wearing giant things, and they could just pop their earbuds in, and you don't have to listen to anything, but just having that noise cancellation on, suddenly it's a lot quieter and a lot more manageable. There's so many little things we can do that we don't cost anything. Something that they've done for my son, like I said, is he can, and they do it for a few kids, they can pick up blue tack to use for stimming. And I thought that was marvelous, because they've looked at it and thought, we could have loads of different putties and whatever else, but that's going to be really obvious if they're sitting there playing with putty, and other kids are going to, if they've got a bit of blue tack and they're just playing with the blue tack and it's helping them, giddy up. And that's a really good example of something very inexpensive, creating a solution to a problem that probably isn't widely understood.
Definitely. And something I found out about the other day that I did not know, a strategy called low demand. So it's something I think that could probably benefit all children, whether you're neurodiverse or not, to sort of feel in control and not have that Coke bottle point that you were talking about earlier. So what is low demand, and what does it entail? How can it help? Especially PDAs.
There's so many things in this world that started as aids for disability that have moved on to become electric can openers were for people who didn't have dexterity in their hands and couldn't open cans. Suddenly everyone's like, well, that's not a bad idea, is it? TV remote controls. So many things in life that make our life easier and smoother are there because they were originally designed to be an adapted piece of technology to aid the disabled. And I think low demand environments are a really good example of something which actually can benefit everybody, not everyone. And this is the other thing. I mean, again, where I feel for educators, because you're in a class of probably 30 kids, and you've got to have some kind of structure and boundaries. And the irony with PDA is that you've got to have both low demand and really firm boundaries. It's a really difficult one to manage. Creating a low demand environment, it comes, as I said before, it's that whole thing of how do I get my daughter to tidy her room? I won't say go and tidy your room, because it's going to create a demand and anxiety. It's going to create a demand and therefore an avoidant response. If I'm there with her and I'd say, where should we put this? Where would you like this? She has a sense of control. Where do I want this? I can put this where I want. I'd like to put it here. Oh, giddy up. Great. Here you go. Move on to the next thing. And you start to build. And unfortunately, she learns. She's not stupid. So after 3 times doing that, she's like, you just want me to tidy my room. No. And so you constantly have to adapt. Being able to bring in that low demand environment. A great example, mornings were always a real challenge for us. A morning getting ready for school is just demand on demand on demand, as we said before. What eventually clicked with me, and so much of this was, those, you look back and go, oh, why didn't I do that all along? But it was like, okay, how do you want to do your mornings? So we know there's these things we have to go. You have to be ready. You have to have your teeth cleaned, and you have to have a wash, and you have to have your breakfast, and you have to be ready. But how about this? What do you like to do first? What will make you feel best? So she started to manufacture her own morning of how it works. She sticks to it because it's hers. It wasn't very different from what I'd have wanted anyway. But the reality is, it's more that I don't get dressed until 10 to 8 now. So she'll come down in her pajamas, do her bits and pieces, get her lunch ready, because she outside. That's a control thing. So I realized, she was making I was making her lunches, and it was always a problem. That wasn't right. This wasn't right. Being able to relinquish some control. Okay, what do you want? What do you want? And she picks what she has in there, and then she assembles it herself. It's all in her wheelhouse, and she feels that control. She knows when she wants to get ready. She knows when the taxi's coming, and so she knows where to be out ready for it. And she structures her own time around it. That's a really good example of, I've taken the demand away. Again, complexities come into it, because for a lot of PDAs, even demands from yourself are demands you want to avoid. I interviewed a lovely lady, Laura, who is actually a teacher herself and a PDA. And she said that she's got 5 supermarkets in 5 minutes walking distance from her house, but she still gets home delivery, simply because the demand of getting out there is, it's a self-imposed demand. That's her way of dealing with it. And I applaud that. That's fantastic. She's worked a solution around, but that's her own, making her own low demand environment that allows her to function. So low demand, I found we use it with my son now, just because it naturally progressed. There are times where I have to be more firm with my son. He's not a PDA. He is ADHD. There are certain things, and we've been very open with both our kids, that there are times that you're going to get away with things your sister won't. There are times that she's going to get away with things you won't. In the end, it all balances out, but it's just because these are the things that each individual needs. You are 2 very different people. It builds an understanding of an acceptance as well of other people. By bringing that low demand thing in there, rather than saying to my son, you left a mess in the living room, clean it up, being able to say, oh, should we put this away? Where would you like this to go? Makes a difference. And he feels more involved and more in control. And it's just a natural thing, creating an independence. It's just a benefit down the track. There's loads of stuff out there. The PDA Society website has a load of information on low demand. There's some fantastic book recommendations on there as well. Low demand parenting is essential for PDA parents, or parents of PDAs, I should say. I think it's something that can benefit bringing that in. And if you can do that in the classroom, again, nothing but sympathy, because it's not easy. And reality is, my daughter couldn't function in a mainstream school. I don't care how good the mainstream school is. Her needs just will not work for that. by presenting some low demand situations. It might be assemblies, like, do you want to go to assembly or do you want to go and chill in the library this time? You're giving them a control and an option within that. Both are perfectly acceptable. So you're handing some control in. By that, you're reducing that internal anxiety and you're helping that person get through the day. It's just win-win as far as I can see. I'm saying that again, it's not always win-win, because there are going to be situations where you just can't. You've got to control 30 kids between two people in a classroom. I do get it.
Definitely. Sounds like as well that maybe one of the big changes that teachers could use is just like the difference in how you ask something, like the language you use.
It's all down to, actually, that's a really good point. It's all down to your language. It's simply how you are expressing things. I had this thing where I look back at my school life, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And there were kids there that I look back and realize now were neurodivergent, but they were just labeled as troublesome kids, the problem people in the class or whatever. And that was what they were lumped with. We're in such a weird situation now where it's kind of like we're getting so much more understanding of neurodiversity and the different neurotypes that are out there and how we can support. But it's, it takes sadly far too long for the systems to catch up with that understanding. Those little things we can do now, research the low demand, because it does come back to language. Like I say, it's not about, I'm not saying you can get away with not cleaning your room up. What I'm doing is, in my language, adopting a different approach. And I suck a lot of the time at it. I still stuff it up, and you will. Big part of, I think, being this is allowing yourself to make some mistakes, learning from them and moving on. It's that thing of just in our approach and how we deal with things, rather than when I can see my daughter's edging towards a meltdown, if I can see the anxieties building, of, you learn to see those warning signs very quickly. I will try and engage Spock. One of the things I do is I will say, think about what's happening next. Okay, just calm, breathe, think about what you're going to do next. Because if you're going to go into a meltdown, then you're going to be, you're probably going to be in trouble. You might break something that you really treasure. Is that what you want? I'm encouraging her to use her logical processing. So using that language, again, it's low demand. Just think about it. What do you want to do? Is that really what you want? Or do you want, let's work through this together? Rather than me going, calm down, which is like holding a red flag up to a bull. It's inviting her to be a participant and in control of what she's going to do next. But it has the added bonus of keeping Spock engaged in the process, keeping that logic in play, and will hopefully avoid getting to the point where the red light's reached and everything melts down.
We actually have some great resources on the SEND network as well about low demand. So check it out.
Fantastic. Do that.
I wanted to finish on working with parents. Obviously, you are PDA Dad UK. That is the important bit. First and foremost, a father to a child with PDA. So from your experience, what are the best ways to include parents for like SENDcos, educators, when working with children with PDA, and help them unmask and etc.?
The first thing is listen. I mean, I think it's probably the thing that everybody would instantly say, obvious, when it can be really hard to listen sometimes, and it can be because you've got your own opinions and things that are set. And it can be very difficult sometimes to be somebody who is prepared to take on board what a parent is saying. Don't launch straight to parent blame. Again, I understand, and it can be I'm seeing nothing but an angelic perfection in the classroom. The natural progression of logic from that says they're not behaving that way at home, therefore there's obviously a problem at home. Understanding that masking process really does help to start supporting. So simply by saying to a parent or a carer, look, I know a little bit about masking, I don't know a lot, but I understand that if you're experiencing this at home, it could be that. So I'm going to keep an eye on things. What you're doing is aligning yourself with that parent or carer. Like I say, when you're at that point, normally you're only dealing with the people who are fighters and have been fighting a long time to get their kids the support they need and deserve. So what you want to do is, if you're going to diffuse that, I used to be a salesman, and they teach you this thing when you're learning is that a sale is like a corridor, and you've got your door at the end that you want the person to get through. and you've got all these escape routes on the way down the corridor. You need to gently shut those doors so that they wind up at the door to the sale. Really what you're doing by that is avoiding an escape route in that situation. If you're empathizing and saying, I'm no expert, but I do understand a little bit about masking, and I know that, I can see that could be a potential problem that's taking place, a challenge that you guys are meeting. I'm going to keep an eye and take some notes, and then maybe we can get together and we can discuss this, and we can look for how we can maybe do some referrals. The biggest problem is that the referral process, the diagnostic process, relies so much on school input that kids aren't being diagnosed early enough because it's being delayed, because the schools are going, we're not seeing problems here, because they're not. And parents are going, they're freaking problems, I'm telling you right now. And so they end up on parenting courses and all this kind of stuff just to go through and get to the point where, maybe we actually need to look at the child and see if there is something more going on. If we want to support our kids, and I genuinely don't think you don't have to view neurodiversity as a disability. It's a very trite thing. It's a different ability, not a disability. There are elements of it that are that high anxiety can be disabling. I don't think you can shirk around that. But what you can do is go, you know what? We have come so far as a society with so many isms in this world, not perfect, and there's a long way to go with most isms still, but ableism is the one ism that still really isn't addressed, because generally people think it's associated with a cost. You have to adapt to school or adapt to shop to be wheelchair friendly. You have to make these adaptations, and they cost money, and there's an investment that takes place. It's not as simple as just re-educating people to, just because your skin color is different doesn't mean you're less than human. And I think that's a thing that really happens in this world, is that the way the isms work is that you dehumanize an element of society. We need to rehumanize people, and for the disabled community in general, stop looking at disfigurement or looking at them as being stuck in a wheelchair, or their limb different, having a prosthetic or whatever. It's like, why can't we just look past that to the person, the human being behind it? And when you start looking at that, you want to start making changes to make the world a better place. I don't think people are inherently evil. I don't think teachers are teaching because they don't like kids. It's the opposite. I think people want the world to be a better place. This is a place that we can really start to make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well, perfect bit to end on. We're going to summarize, though, what the 3 key takeaways of this episode are. So in your own words, what are they?
When the parents or carers are talking to you, listen to what they're saying and don't leap to the conclusions. Actually, there's nothing wrong with going, let me think on this for a couple of days. For myself, I'd much rather hear that someone's going to think about it than just jump to the conclusion that there's something wrong at home and, lead us down a garden path that we don't need. That's the key thing. Listen, engage with parents, and build that trust between the two. And it's a really hard thing to do, as I say, because you're left with the fighters mainly. 2, look for those other parents in the class that aren't making a fuss, but you might be seeing. The funny thing is with this, once you start opening your eyes to things like masking and stimming, you start to see it a lot more clearly. And you might see a kid in your class that you think they're displaying a lot of traits. They're suppressing them, but they're there. Haven't heard from the parent. That could be that the parent's really struggling to cope and their mechanism is freeze or flight. Being able to connect that way, you will really support people. And in the end, you talk to any parent, I don't know any parent that would argue this. My life revolves around, like you said, making my daughter's tomorrow better than today, my son's tomorrow better than today, my wife's tomorrow better than today. How do I go about doing that? And I think that's something that we all want for our kids. So reaching out and saying, look, I'm noticing some stuff, and it can be an awkward conversation, and I don't shy away from that. Saying to somebody, I'm worried there's, I can see traits of ADHD in your son. Is that something that you've considered? But opening that up might just be opening up the pathway to a better tomorrow than today for that family and for that individual at the end of it, which is the child. The third thing I would say is make your environment for these kids safe. Make yourself a trusted, safe person. Look for ways that you can do that. Empathize, sympathize. Use low demand techniques in order to build that relationship up. Takes time. It's not always going to work, but I think it's something that's so integral, is being able to, if you're a trusted person for that child, their experience of school, of your class, he's going to be that much better. I was reading an article. There's a teacher who didn't understand. His class had started saying, "You're the goat, man," and he was sort of like, "Yeah, you're the goat too." Yeah, he didn't know, and it was only I think he posted it on Reddit or something and had no idea what it meant. He was just like, "Yeah, they all call me the goat. I think it's funny." And somebody said, "You do realize that stands for greatest of all time?" And he was really touched. That's because just the way he identified with the kids, they loved him. And, we can all remember teachers like that in our childhoods. Yeah. If I was a teacher, I'd want to be that teacher that somebody looked back and go, they really made a difference in my life. That's a great way to go about it. Make yourself a safe and trusted person. Obviously, you got boundaries. Obviously, there are rules. Obviously, there's a lot to take into consideration with that. But just putting yourself in a position where they know they can trust you, that you're not going to betray that trust, and they can feel safe sharing how they're really feeling with you is going to make a humongous difference in that child's life.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully after this podcast, we'll have a lot more educators that are goats. So
absolutely right. That's the He's the goat. That's it. Embrace the goat.
Duncan, so thank you so much for joining me. It's been really great chatting to you.
Likewise, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You'll always know when new content's going up. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.